Hey everybody, Aaron Blaise here, and as many of you know, over the last year or so, we've decided to bring in a few other artists to help fill out creatureartteacher.com. We've got Chuck Williams, that's teaching story. We have Lyndon Ruddy, who is teaching storyboarding. We've also got Ronnie Williford, who has been teaching color theory. Well, Ronnie has just come out with another brand new course on plein air painting in watercolor and oil. This is an amazing course. It's so full. It's over 10 hours of instruction on taking you out into the field, what to expect, what kind of easels to use, how to cut your boards, and most importantly, how to paint in different situations, different lighting, all of that. It's an amazing course. I'm over the moon for it. We're all very excited to get it out to you, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Look for it right here at creatureartteacher.com, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Hey guys, I'm Ronnie Williford. Welcome to my video class on field sketches in oil and watercolor. In lieu of my usual formal lectures, I've decided to kick this class off with an oil painting demonstration out in the field. I want to skip all the classroom stuff and get your feet wet right off the bat. As we work our way through the different painting locations in this course, I'm going to be nothing if not repetitive. I'm going to go over this stuff until it's branded on the back of your skull. Okay, it's time to get some canvas dirty. Today we're going to be painting at the very end of the peninsula at Ponce Inlet on Florida's east coast, just 5 miles south of Daytona Beach. In fact, we're going to be on the tiny peninsula of sand and mangroves that's at the very tip of the big peninsula, looking northwest towards the historic Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, the tallest lighthouse on Florida's coastline. The first thing I want to do before I even pick up a paintbrush is to do a small little thumbnail drawing of the subject. I want to pre-plot my composition, and I want to think about the values a little bit before I get started. I want to identify my darkest darks, my lightest lights, and see if I can find a value pattern that's sort of connected and running through the whole picture. I'll show you what I mean. The panel that I'm using is a gessoed masonite board cut 12 by 16. First thing I'm going to do is dip into my palette scrapings over here, which every time I finish a painting, I scrape the palette and I make a little pile over here on the side so that I can dip into that and use it occasionally. This is a smaller brush than I normally like to use, but I'm a little nervous about getting that lighthouse perfectly straight up and down, so I'm going to use something a little more pencil-like than I normally would. I knew a painter in Wyoming who loved to go on all of his painting expeditions by horseback. He would take his materials, his paint, his brushes, his panels, and he would just pile them all loose in a saddlebag and throw them on the back of his horse and ride to whatever location he wanted to paint. Once he got there, he would look for a rock or a stump, someplace he could sit down, and he would hold his painting panel between his knees and work like this while he had all of his materials scattered around his feet. He really hated carrying lots of extra weight, and he tried to keep things simple. He just got used to working in this way. Now, everyone has a different idea about the most comfortable way to pack and paint in the field, and that's awesome. It's just really important that you understand you don't have to spend a fortune on fancy easels or expensive gear to work outside. It kind of depends on the medium you want to use and how big you want to work. It also kind of depends on how handy you are with tools. You wouldn't think packing a paint box would be that big of a deal. You just throw your stuff in and go, right? Actually, it can have a huge effect on the success of your day and what your comfort level turns out to be. There's this balance that you need to find between making sure that you have everything you're going to need for the day and overpacking to the point of your stuff getting so heavy you just dread carrying it out and doing work. Now, without getting all involved in all the different portable easel styles, I just want to show you how I set up my rig, the tools that I use, and how I like to work in oil out in the field. We're also going to talk about packing for watercolor out in the field. You can decide for yourself if any of these ideas work for you. I settled on this procedure when I was pretty young. It kind of slowly developed over the years, and mine really hasn't altered much. If you get used to packing a certain way that works for you, by all means, stick to it. Now, first of all, let me show you the main workhorse of my entire rig. This is a little half-size French paint box easel. This is an easel that I bought when I was about 15 years old, and I bought it used. It's not even a real French easel. It's a little Italian knockoff, and I've been painting on this easel now since about 1975, and it's held up amazingly well. Things break on it from time to time, and I continue gluing it, screwing it, and nailing it back together, and it continues to work perfectly fine for me. I've drug this thing through the deserts in the West and across Mexico, up and down the mountains in Colorado and Wyoming, Montana, through the swamps, on islands, on the ocean, and it just continues to be my very favorite box to paint out of. I have a little pochade box that is excellent for traveling. It attaches to a camera tripod, and I can work on that from time to time if I'm having to use an airplane to get around. But given the opportunity, this paint box is my first choice. Now, before we go any further, let's just take a moment and look at these French easels and how they're intended to be set up and torn down. If you've never had the opportunity to use one before, the first time can be a little bit like getting onto a bus with an armload of brooms. You got stuff sticking off in all directions and you're whacking yourself in the head. And really, the way the thing has been designed, it's meant to be set up and torn down very quickly. And once you know the trick, it's really not a big deal. Let's just take a look at it real quick. Because I'm right-handed, I take my non-dominant left hand to pick up the paint box with the handle on the top. Lift it up and turn it so that the bottom of the paint box is facing outwards, away from you. You unclick the leg on the side, press it into the slot that's been cut for it, and close up the wing nut. Tighten it up. Rotate it slightly so you can reach the leg on the other side, click it open, push it into the slot that's been cut for it, and close up the wing nut, just like that. Now, go ahead and extend those front legs with this wing nut here, pushing the legs out forward. The center leg here, grab it at the bottom, swing it out. There's a center section here, swing that out, and open the little extension for the end of the leg here. And your paint box is set up and ready to go. Now, what did that take? A minute? Was that less than a minute? I'm not even sure. When you know how to do this, it goes fairly quickly. When it comes time to pack up and move on to the next painting site, or to head back home or whatever, it's just the same thing in reverse. Put everything together, make sure it's nice and tight, close it up. Grab the handle with your non-dominant hand and let the bottom of the paint box face out. Close up that center leg extension, swing it up, close it like this, and go ahead and close the front leg extensions. Open these side wing nuts enough so that you can click these legs closed and into place. And you're all set and ready to move on. Once again, what did that take? Was that like a minute? Less than a minute? It goes pretty fast. Now that you've seen the proper way to set one of these things up, you have no excuse to need to lay your paint box face down on the ground or try to balance it on your knee or hug it in your arms and unclip legs and whack yourself in the mouth. The thing is, the light's changing and your time is limited. You want to spend as much time as possible working on your artwork, not fooling with your gear. The tools in your rig break down into two categories: your primary tools and your secondary tools. Your primary tools consist of anything that you're going to need to make a picture. This would be your pigment, your brushes, a panel to paint on, vehicle to thin your paint and wash your brushes, a palette to mix on, this sort of thing. If you forget any one of these elements, you're not going to be making a picture that day. Now, your secondary tools are a little more flexible. These are the things that you bring along with you that make your life a little more comfortable while you're working. Everyone has a slightly different idea as to what these should be. I'm just going to show you the ones that I've been carrying with me for the last 40 years. Let's start by talking about primary tools. This is a palette that I made myself that fits the top of this box perfectly. I never got comfortable with the palette that came in this box. First of all, it's got a thumb hole cut in it, and it's designed so that you put your thumb through here and you hold the palette in one hand and mix your paint with the other. I've never been very comfortable with that. I'd much rather have my palette stabilized to my box and have both hands free so I can clean brushes or whatever. This palette also has a problem in that it doesn't fit the top of the box perfectly. It's cut nice and thin, but when you close the box up, it leaves this gap right here where I'll be walking along and dropping brushes and tubes of paint out of it as I'm going along. And I'll have to backtrack and pick up all the tools that I dropped on my way to a painting site. I built this palette out of 2 pieces of hardwood and 2 heavy hinges. And I put a latch here on the back so I can lock it open and stabilize it. On the top, I cut these deep, heavy grooves along the top and the bottom, and I sanded it from the center out to the edge here to make it smooth. This affords me the opportunity to leave paint squirted out here on the top of the palette, and when I close it up, it doesn't mash the paint between 2 pieces of wood. It makes room for the paint. This solved 2 problems for me. First of all, I could carry paint between painting sites without having to clean the palette every time. And I had a new palette that fit the box exactly, and I wasn't dropping stuff out of the box anymore. When I first began painting in the field, I was using a limited palette, the 3 primary colors along with white. The base color palette that I'm using now is a warm and cool version of each of those. I've got ultramarine blue as my warm blue. It leans slightly to violet. And then I've got my cerulean blue, or sometimes cobalt blue for a cool blue. Cad yellow light, or cad lemon, is my cool yellow. And yellow ochre is what I'm using for a warm yellow. It's kind of a forced, earthy yellow. I'm using alizarin crimson as my cool red, a slightly magenta red. And cadmium scarlet, or cad red light, is what I'm using as a warm red. By combining these 6 colors along with white, you should be able to paint anything you can find out in the world. Any colors that you want to add to your palette at this point, I consider those to be luxury colors. Luxury colors serve 2 purposes. First of all, it can be a shortcut. You might select a color that's already really close to the color out in the field that you're seeing, and it keeps you from having to do very much mixing in order to hit your target. And secondly, a luxury color might have a hue that's chemically unique, something that you can't mix using your 6 base colors. One of the luxury colors that I like to use on my palette consistently is cadmium orange. I can mix some pretty nice oranges using my base palette, but cadmium orange has this beautiful intensity. It's got a really strong tinting strength, and not only will it help you retain some of the brightness in your mixing, you can also mix some really awesome grays with it. I find it really versatile. If you find yourself working consistently in an analogous type of situation, where everything is always the same color, like let's say you live in an area where everything is very green, you can certainly experiment using your base colors and mixing different greens and getting different tones and values. But it might be fun to add a variety of greens to your palette just to experiment with. Living in a tropical area, I find having green on my palette to be useful sometimes, so I carry it with me. I've got a cool green and a warm green. My cool green is phthalo green. This is a very acid color. You have to use it sort of sparingly, but you get some really interesting mixes with it. The sap green is my warm green. It has a fairly weak tinting strength and it grays easily. It mixes with yellow and orange in a really beautiful way. I find both of these extremely useful. Here's a color I carry in my box that I rarely use. It's dioxazine purple. My brother hated this color. He said that he could never learn to control it. It was too acid. So I started carrying it in my paint box just to annoy him. I'd squirt a little bit out on my palette just to hear him complain. In truth, you can mix a color that's very close to dioxazine purple using alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. And you can tilt the temperature one way or the other, so it's nice to have that control. After my brother passed away, I think I continued to carry the dioxazine purple because it just reminded me of him. I could squirt a little bit out on my palette and I could hear his voice complaining about it. For white paint, I exclusively use titanium. I've tried using some of the other versions of white and I just can't get comfortable with them. They're either too chalky or too weak or too gray. Some of them are kind of eggshell-ish colored. Titanium white is a very, very strong, very white white. It's got a strong tinting strength and it's very permanent. You're going to want to buy the big tube because you're going to use more white on your palette than any of the other colors. When I'm working in the field, I deliberately keep my paintbrush choices simple. There's a huge variety of different brushes you can choose from out there, different kinds of styles and certainly different kinds of hairs. I exclusively use hog's hair brushes for oil work, and there are 4 main styles: rounds, brights, flats, and filberts. And I only ever use 2 of those. I use brights and I use filberts. Brights and flats are almost the same thing. It's just that the brights have a much shorter hair length. This makes them very quick to snap back into place once you've made a stroke on the canvas. It's very similar to using a pencil, and so they're very fast. This makes them my all-time favorite brush to use. Filberts have a much longer hair, and they've got this curving taper to the top. When they're wet with paint, they almost make a knife blade. These are perfect for cutting into an area where you're trying to make a hard edge. Now, the sizes for paintbrushes are categorized by number, 1 being the smallest and 20 being the largest. Actually, they may go bigger than that, I don't know. I've never had a use for an oil brush bigger than a 14. Because the panel sizes that I use in the field are considered to be fairly small, I've settled into using only 4 sizes of brushes. I use 10s, 8s, 6s, and 4s. Now, the formal idea here is you're supposed to take the big brush and do your lay-in and work your way down to the small brush for details. But I'm notorious for picking up a number 10 and painting with that one brush all day long. It's really a matter of deciding what feels the most comfortable to you. I would suggest experimenting with different size brushes and just settle into what feels good. There is a big variety of mediums and vehicles out there that you can use to thin your paint or clean your brushes. And new products are being introduced all the time. I myself use odorless mineral spirits, or sometimes artists' terpenoid. I started out using mineral spirits in the very beginning, and I guess I'm just a creature of habit. I've never changed. I carry my mineral spirits in one of these little cosmetic bottles. You can get them at the drugstore. They're really inexpensive. And I've got a cup with a clip on the bottom of it so that it clips to the side of your palette. You can put your mineral spirits in here and wash your brushes out. I make my own panels to paint on. It's a simple masonite hardboard with 2 coats of acrylic gesso and a very light hand sanding. We're going to talk more about panels later. Carrying panels in your gear is really not that big of a deal, but carrying wet paintings is another thing entirely. For years, I used to bring wet paintings home spread across the dashboard of my car or across the back seat where I used to get paint all over everything. There was this one time when I got caught in a hailstorm in the Colorado mountains. I had to hike down the mountain with the painting held over my head, facing down, trying to protect the surface of it from the weather. The outcome was still not awesome. So after that, I decided to build panel boxes of my own, designed specifically to carry wet paintings and keep the surfaces safe. The box is constructed to exactly fit one of the dimensions of the panel size. Because I like to paint 11 by 14s, the inside dimensions of this box is 11 by 15 and a half. I gave myself just a little extra room in case I wanted a little fluctuation in size. As long as one of the dimensions of your panel is 11 inches, you can put a lot of different sizes in there. 11 by 11s, 11 by 6s, you get the idea. Each slot in the top and in the bottom inside of the box will hold 2 wet paintings placed back to back. You just slide your wet painting inside and close it up to be protected while you're traveling. That could be driving or hiking, whatever. I build my boxes with only 2 slots. I almost never paint more than 3 paintings in a day, and I don't want to carry more weight than I need to. I also like to cut special shoes that fit the rail slides on my paint box. This way I can carry my whole rig as one unit. Now we're going to talk about this in more detail later. I just wanted you to see how I like to do it. The last 2 things that I bring as part of my primary kit is a roll of paper towels, so I've got something to wipe my brushes off on and I can clean up my palette at the end. And a plastic garbage bag so I can carry out my debris and I can leave my painting area cleaner than how I found it. Now let's take a look at my secondary tools. After you've been painting out in the field for a while, you start thinking about the things that you wish you had brought with you, or you come across a circumstance where you go, geez, if I had only brought one of these, this wouldn't have been a problem. Everyone's kind of got a little bit different idea about what these things are, and I'm just going to show you the things that I carry with me. It's real easy to pack too much and make your box heavier than it needs to be. I've got mine broken down to the absolute bare essentials. I always carry a palette knife with me so that I can clean up a palette at the end of every painting. I also carry a folding knife with me. This thing's got a million uses. I've used it for cutting rope, fishing line, I've drilled holes with it, I've unscrewed screws with it. It's just a really useful thing to have. Here's something I started carrying early on, a tiny pair of pliers. This can help you loosen wing nuts that are frozen or rusted on your box. It'll also help you open tubes of paint that may have dried shut or just are really hard to open. I can't stress enough how handy this thing has been. These little miniature bungee cords have a million uses. I've used them for holding my paper towels to the side of my paint box. I've used them to hook my paint box to my backpack to hold it down when the wind was too high. My painting was acting like a sail. It was trying to blow my paint box over. These things, I don't even know how many uses I've been able to make out of these. I carry a little tape measure because I always seem to have a need for one. Not just measuring panels, but measuring little short distances and all kinds of things. This is an item that should probably be in my primary tool list. This is a bottle of liquid gloves. This is something that you put on your hands like a lotion, and it protects them while you're painting from any toxicities in the paint or in the medium that you're using. This is a really awesome tool. When you're all done working, you just wash your hands with soap and water and everything comes off. This is an old broken leg off of a camera tripod, and it extends like this to make a nice long stick. And I've been using it as a portable maul stick. If you haven't seen a maul stick used before, it's kind of an opportunity where you've got this rubber-tipped end that you put on the side of your paint box and get the stick up close to your painting, and you rest your hand on the maul stick and work on details without getting your hand into the wet painting. It's just kind of a stabilizer for your hand. And finally, I always like to bring either a little pad of paper or these 3x5 note cards and a pencil. When I was starting out, I got into the habit of doing these little thumbnail drawings of my composition before I started painting. It's a way of working out some of the problems you might run into before you get knee-deep into them. We're going to talk about this more during the painting demonstrations. Just know that it's really handy to have some paper and a pencil to draw with. Now, this next segment is extremely optional, but I promised that I would show you my entire painting kit, so here it is. I carry a separate shoulder bag with a few items that are geared towards personal comfort and protection. If you choose to pack a bag of personal items to bring along as part of your paint gear, you're going to pack it so that it meets your personal needs. Every item in my bag is there because I once needed it on a paint trip and I didn't have it. But like your paint gear, this bag can get really heavy if it's overloaded. So be really careful and just pack the essentials you need that are going to get you through your day. First of all, I bring a pack of my personal medication because I guess crabby old artists just have to take their medicine. I bring a cell phone, and I also use it as a camera. I know a lot of artists that bring little micro cameras. I bring a couple of containers of water, one for myself and one for a companion I'll be painting with. I also bring some bug spray. This is really important. I also bring some sunscreen, which is extremely important. I bring an energy drink or something to eat. Usually something with some sugar in it, something that'll replace your energy if it turns out you've been out in the field too long. I also bring some personal bandages and some antibiotic ointment. Then I have a compass and some lip balm to protect my lips from the wind and the sun. And I bring a small towel. Everybody is going to have their own version of this. I've seen artists carry a small umbrella or rain gear, extra socks, pepper spray. extra eyeglasses, you get the idea. It's not necessary to be a Boy Scout and packed for every possible scenario. Just be aware of the area where you're going to be working and bring what you need in order to keep yourself safe and comfortable. This last thing I want to show you is my kit for carrying watercolor out into the field. At first glance, it's going to seem a good deal simpler than my oil rig. In a way, it kind of is. But if you look closely, it requires the exact same tools. And this would be the case whether you were using acrylic or egg tempera or gouache or any other sort of wet medium. This is an old U.S. Army surveyor's bag that I found in an Army surplus store in Denver, Colorado, many, many years ago. I had thought I was going to set it up and use it as a drawing bag, but somehow my watercolors migrated to it. The palette that I'm using with this kit is an old metal enamel butcher's tray. I think you can still order these from art suppliers, and occasionally they turn up on eBay. This is a great palette for using to mix watercolors on. It's real resistant, cleans up real fast. Rather than bringing tubes of paint with me, I carry one of these little folding trays. You can get these, I think, at pretty much any art supplier, and they come in all different sizes and all different styles. I've seen them in metal and plastic. I've seen them much bigger than this. You can get large versions of this. This is the one I settled on because it fit this bag perfectly. And the colors that I'm using here are pretty much the same colors that I described to you with my oil kit. It's just that these are all watercolors. I use Arches watercolor paper, and I buy it in blocks. I just find it cleaner and more convenient. This is both 140 weight, 7 by 10 inches, because that just happens to fit my bag. I carry a block of the hot press and a block of the cold press. The hot press has more of a smooth, slick surface on it, and the cold press has a textured surface. Oh, it also has a painting on it. This has a more textured surface. Both of them work awesome, and it's just a matter of preference, which one you like. I enjoy having a choice. I am super picky about watercolor brushes. I've tried all different kinds of synthetics and squirrel hair and vegetable hair and different things, and I have found that the only thing I get a really great performance out of is the Kolinsky Red Sable watercolor brushes. The amazing thing is that you can get away with just taking one brush into the field with you if you like. This will do just about anything. You can lay in big, massive areas with it or do the tiniest little details, and it points up very fine. This is a great performance brush. The downside to using these is that they're very expensive. You'll pay between $200 and $400 a piece for these Red Sable watercolor brushes. And they're worth it. You'll get plenty of performance out of them if you take good care of them. It's just that you need to know ahead of time you'll be making an investment if you decide you want to use one of these. I carry my brushes in a style that was designed to protect calligraphy brushes. This is a sushi roll mat that I bought at an Asian grocery store. And I use it to roll my brushes up and keep the hairs protected, keep them nice and safe. I never carry more than 2 watercolor brushes out into the field, a round and a flat, and I almost never use the flat. And finally, I have a water container for bringing water. This is another style of cosmetic bottle that you can get at the drugstore. And plenty of paper towels so that I can clean my brushes and keep things nice and dry. Like my oil kit, I also carry the 3x5 note cards and some pencils, so I can do little thumbnail drawings before I start my painting. I also carry my personals bag, which has got my water in it, but I try not to paint with my drinking water. I'll use whatever water is available from a river or a lake. I've even been known to paint with ocean water. My goal for taking you through my whole setup here is to hopefully start you thinking about your own paint gear, and maybe help prevent you from arriving at a painting site having forgotten something really important. I'm sure I'll be talking about more of all of this during my demonstrations. But for now, when you see something in my kit in the field, you'll know exactly what it is and you'll know what it's there for.